Way back in the 1870s, Gottlieb Daimler and Wilhelm Maybach both worked for Nicholas Otto and perfected the four-stroke petrol engine, which was patented in Otto's name in 1877, and more than 100 years later, the four-stroke Otto cycle is still the basis of the petrol engines which power billions of road-going vehicles. Daimler and Maybach left Otto and moved together to Cannstatt, where, as the Daimler company, they set up in a tiny workshop in the conservatory of a nearby hotel in order to further develop petrol engines. The first small single-cylinder unit was used to power the world's first motorcycle, and then a series of motorcycles until, in 1886, they built a car based on a horse-drawn carriage with an engine just less than 500cc. Daimler was mostly interested in the engines themselves, as were the financiers who helped get the company going, but it was Maybach who saw a future for cars and urged the first purpose-built motor car into production. This time, the chassis was purpose-made by NSU, and though the engine still relied on the hot tube ignition system which had fired up the earlier models, it also featured Maybach's critically important invention, the atomising carburettor. By now, the company was building cars as a business, although records from the period are sparse and exact production figures are unobtainable. But it seems they may have been making around a dozen cars each year. And by now, the idea of the motor car had become far more firmly established. Indeed, Daimler had a nearby rival in the shape of Benz. Not only were the products being sold to the wealthy aristocracy, but they were already being used in competition. Motor racing had just begun, and Daimler was among the first. Within a few short years, success had come upon the company, just as it was also launching other far-sighted individuals into the pages of automotive history. Maybach and Daimler had suddenly gone from being a pair of eccentric, groundbreaking scientists labouring away in a tiny workshop to being ambassadors of the greatest industry the world had ever seen, although they could not have been aware of it. But even as they moved into new and larger premises with a workforce to help them build more and more cars, they could have had no idea of the threshold on which they stood. A brand new industry that grew to maturity in the space of a single lifetime. Sadly, Gottlieb Daimler never saw it happen. He died in 1900 at the very moment his son Paul was taking several Daimler cars for inspection and approval by the Kaiser. He returned to Cannstatt to take control of the company his father had created. The car industry wasn't the only beneficiary of the petrol engines Daimler had devised. While his bankers had been more interested in low-revving static engines for industrial use, Daimler had pursued the aesthetically more pleasing and technically more challenging goal of developing high-revving lightweight engines for use in moving vehicles. And ironically, it was the excitement of powered flight that now attracted Maybach. By 1907, he had left Daimler to work on the development of large-capacity engines for Zeppelin airships. And in the wake of his departure, the responsibility for design and engineering was taken over by Paul Daimler, and he added that to his existing role as the head of the company. Emil Jelinek bought his first Daimler in 1896, and within a couple of years he'd sold several more to his wealthy Riviera set of friends. Realising the potential of another new industry which was just being born, he took to the challenge of selling cars as seriously and enthusiastically as he'd taken to the new sport of motor racing. In fact, he was so serious that in 1900 he gave Daimler the precise specifications of the car he wanted Daimler to build for him, and offered to buy 36 in exchange for the exclusive agency in parts of Europe and all of the USA. All the cars sold by him would be named after his 11-year-old daughter, Mercedes. 3 years later, Daimler had moved to a new factory in Untertürkheim, and the following year the first production facilities were established in the USA to feed a growing market. Henry Ford was on the very brink of mass production for the masses, but Daimler cars were already popular among European royalty and America's rapidly expanding class of nouveau riche entrepreneurs. Names like Vanderbilt and Astor figured on the client list, and John Jacob Astor's personal car remains as a testament to a degree of opulence that was only just beginning to express itself through the motor car, and which combined traditional coach-building luxury with the somewhat hit-and-miss technology of the day. But the times were changing, driven not least by the increasing demands of the wealthy clientele. Every businessman wanted to impress his rivals, and every European crowned head wanted to impress everybody and anybody. By 1908, all Daimler cars were called Mercedes, regardless of who sold them, and even though they were badged as Daimlers, and they were favourites with Europe's royalty, although it was already clear that dark clouds were gathering around the heads of state. But in 1909, Daimler had trademarked the three-pointed star, which had served as its emblem for some time already, and Paul Daimler began to engineer a range of cars which would ensure the company's future. So far, the main bulk of effort, insofar as it had any actual direction at all, had been driven by the demands of customers. And the only customers a car manufacturer had were people wealthy enough to pay for the products. And what they wanted was big, luxurious and impressive vehicles, so that's what Daimler and others delivered. In America, Henry Ford had seen a different picture and was busy trying to create a brand new market for smaller, cheaper cars, built in volume. It was an idea that André Citroën and others adopted with readiness in post-war Europe. But Paul Daimler recognised the opportunity and began to work on cars which were more accessible to more people. Like so many other car makers, Daimler had become involved in racing primarily as a means of improving the technology and demonstrating the capabilities of their products, and hopefully their superiority as well. Brooklands, Indianapolis and Le Mans were all born of this era, and the intrepid racers who blazed their trail were laying the foundations of an industry that still functions in the same way today as then. The advertising industry calls it success advertising, but the car makers say it better. Race on Sunday, sell on Monday.